Nora?
Okay. Hola, comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Américas. The book club team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we celebrate our book club's quinceañera. It has been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these many years, and we look forward to the next 15 years. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat, moderated by Comadre Maria Ferrer. Tonight, please help us welcome Comadres authors Natalia Sylvester and Julissa Arce. Their interviews will begin shortly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Keep yourself on mute. You may keep your videos on, but don't move around a lot because it becomes distracting to others. We suggest you put yourself on speaker mode so that the speaker is big on your screen, but you can use gallery if that's your preference. And if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But first, let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Tess, take it away.
Hi, I'm Tess Tobin, submissions coordinator for the book club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York in Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started our teleconferences in October of 2006. We are in our 15th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website at latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Karen?
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our October 2022 Zoom teleconference. This is Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we begin our interviews with Natalia Sylvester, who is the award-winning author of 2 novels for adults and young adults. Chasing the Sun was named the best debut book of 2014 by Latinidad magazine. And Everyone Knows You Go Home won an International Latino Book Award and the 2019 Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters. Her 3rd novel, Running, was a 2020 Junior Library Guild selection and a 2021 Rise, a Feminist Book Project list selection. Natalia's most recent YA novel is Breathe and Count Back from 10. Born in Lima, Peru, Natalia received a BA in creative writing from the University of Miami and now lives and writes in South Florida. Interviewing Natalia is Karen Valentin, an award-winning author of the memoir, The Mother God Made Me to Be. Her new children's book, God is Just Like Me, will be released in January from Beaming Books. Karen is also a fine artist and baker who was featured on Food Network for the show Christmas Cookie Challenge. She lives in Manhattan with her 2 boys and is working on a memoir about her family's journey with ADHD. Comadre Karen, take it away.
Karen, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm just saying that thank you all for coming, and I'm really excited to meet Natalia. I wish that I could like pick the brains of every author that I, of the works that I read. And I just really enjoyed your book so much. It was just such it was such a smooth read, and the characters just really came to life, and I just really enjoyed my time reading your story. And so what I really wanted to know is the character. She's so vivid. Is there any part of the of Veronica in you?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. I'm so happy that you enjoyed it, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. And I just want to briefly also thank Las Comadres, because you all have been so supportive of me and my books from the very beginning, and it really just means a lot. So thank you. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, I definitely think there are parts of me in Veronica. It's inevitable that that it wouldn't be, especially because, you know, Veronica and I share so much in common. I'm, you know, just to briefly mention, so Breathe and Count Back from 10 is about Veronica, who's 17 years old. She's a Peruvian American. She was born in Peru and came to the US very young, like me. She was born with hip dysplasia and grew up with, you know, being in and out of surgeries, also like me. And we also then veer off in terms of our experiences. She lives in a town that is very close to she lives in a town where there's a theme park that it's called Mermaid Cove, and underwater performers dance with tails as mermaids. And I actually did live in a Florida town near Weeki Wachee is what it's called.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I did. But
a little bit about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, unlike Vero, I never got to become a mermaid. So I kind of lived vicariously through her in this story. And you know, I found it surprising how many parts of her were you know, inspired by my life in big and also small ways. You know, this story was just so personal to me, but it was also difficult to write, and I had to create a lot of distance between Vero and I in order for her to be able to tell her story and for her to become her own character. And so I think that, you know, even though we share so many similarities, it might be it could be tempting to think it's autobiographical, but the thing is that, you know, I love writing novels, and that's my chosen medium for this story. And the reason I think I did that is because to me, there's so much freedom in writing fiction. You get to pull from both your hopes and your dreams, and maybe, you know, your fears. You pull from all these true places, but then, at least for me, I kind of created something that I wished I'd either experienced or wish I'd known or learned. It was really like I was writing a book for my 17-year-old self, and like the book that I wish she could have read. And there's a certain magic in that, in really looking at your life and being able to look back with the perspective to take certain pieces and craft it into something that feels bigger than yourself, and that feels like it's bringing meaning to everything that you went through, and a meaning that perhaps at the time you went through it, you were not yet aware of. And so for me, that's really why it's kind of a yes and no question, right? There's a lot of parts of me and Vero, but she is truly her own person.
Okay. Oh, I'm curious, what the similarities, were you able, was swimming something that you had to do in order for your the therapy with your hip dysplasia?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very much, it was recommended to me that I swim. I was always told that I should avoid high impact activities like running, which is really funny considering my first book is called Running.
Running.
Even though it has nothing to do with actually running.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, the water was really a place that always felt safe for me, not just because it's actually gentler on your joints, but also, and because, and this is true for Vero as well, she feels safer in the water. She feels more at home in the water, because it's a place where she just really gets to be herself without worrying about the gazes of others, without worrying if they're staring at her limping, if they're judging the way she moves, if they're looking at her scars with like with the kind of morbid curiosity that I grew to really to really hate when I was younger. And so I think that, that's really where the idea of mermaids came from, aside from the fact that like, who doesn't want to be a mermaid?
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. One of the things I really loved about your writing is all the different parallels that you that you created. And so Veronica discovers these metaphors between her hip dysplasia and the situations and relationships in her own life. And I just wanted you to kind of expand a little bit about that, expand on that and tell the audience a bit about those parallels.
Yeah, absolutely. So hip dysplasia is a condition in which your hip joint actually, or your hip socket doesn't, or excuse me, your joint doesn't quite fit into your socket in a way, like in the way that it should. And so as a result, it often also causes scoliosis. It can cause leg length differences, which it did for myself. And basically, you're not in alignment in your own body. And there was a point at which, years ago, actually, my mom handed me a folder full of documents that she had from my childhood. And in them was my first passport from Peru, my medical records. What else? I mean, report cards, things, but what really stood out to me was that first passport, because here is my passport of me as a baby, like not even 1 year old. And I was flipping through it, and it turned out we had come to the US at one point when I was like 7 or 8 months old. And I was so surprised, because I said to my mom, I was like, I thought we didn't move here till I was 4. And she said, yes, but I brought you here to see this doctor for your hip. And I'd never known that. And it's just something that really made everything click for me, because I realized that I can't really separate my experience as an immigrant from my experience as a disabled Latina. That, both metaphorically and literally, like I have always felt displaced, even in my body. And then once we came over here, in the environment I found myself in, that, as we all know, we navigate a system that is actively wanting to keep us out, and it doesn't necessarily always embrace us in so many ways. And so I just really, once I started to understand the different ways that I really wanted to explore this idea of displacement, and the different ways that Veronica's body has to follow so many rules, that her parents are in the middle of navigating the immigration system. They just got their green cards. They are still very much afraid of being seen as they're very much afraid of anything that might seem to call attention to themselves or threaten their status. And they don't trust that the so-called permanent residency is anything that is a promise that would ever be kept. And so they also impose a lot of rules on her in turn, sometimes, most often out of protection, but they really want her to be a good daughter and a good immigrant, quote unquote. And so these things all are really, it's about who's getting to make decisions over her body.
Right. And that I'm sorry. That was exactly my next question. And I wanted to ask, even before I asked that one, was your mom, did she keep all those papers in a fireproof box? I have to ask that because Veronica's mom did that.
Yeah.
She did? Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I just remember every time we had anything of importance, it was like into the closet we go, find the key. I still remember the way the box like sounded when we clicked it open.
Yeah.
She also had a little box full of all my baby teeth, and she made a little necklace out of it.
Right.
So that's in the book too.
I love that. Well, so the question, it's about self-autonomy, because that's a big theme in your book as well. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit, like you were about to get into, about Veronica's relationship with her parents and all these sacrifices that her parents have made for her, that essentially make them feel that they have this complete ownership of her life and her body. And it's not an easy task to take that ownership back. And I wondered, with this book, are you, what message you want to send, young ladies, especially those in migrant homes, you know, what was that message that you wanted to relate to them?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I wanted them to feel seen, to know that if they've ever felt that way, if they've ever felt that frustration, or even, you know, as Vero does in some ways, like she describes it as feeling suffocated. And it's a hard thing to grapple with, because you know, she loves her parents. She knows that they're trying to do what's best for her, but they have different ideas of what that is. And, you know, case in point, the reason that this summer ends up being so transformative for her is because the mermaid theme park, Mermaid Cove, it turns out they're having auditions for a new mermaid, and it's been Vero's dream to be one. But she also knows that her parents think that it would be fantasías y tonterías. You know, they've always kind of rolled their eyes, written that off. And one of the things that was really interesting when the book went through edits with my publishing house is there was one point where my editor and a couple of people had asked, you know, we need it to be a stronger reason. Like, why wouldn't she just try out? Like, they couldn't quite grasp that just that weight of your parents' expectations would be enough to keep her from this dream. And I didn't want to change that. And I just decided, I was like, no. And I mean, I spoke to, you know, my team about it, and I was like, this is really important. And if anything, I leaned into it more. And I think it becomes clear, you know, Veronica's best friend, Leslie, is, you know, La Americana, as her parents call her.
Right.
And so there's things that Leslie wouldn't understand about the weight of those expectations. So it's definitely, for me, I wanted young girls to know that it's okay to feel that way, that, you know, first and foremost, that they could hopefully feel seen and a little less alone in that. And then hopefully, you know, the ways that Veronica navigates that, if that, you know, inspires anyone else to step into their own power, to find their own voice, to fight a bit for their own dreams. Because I think so much about, you know, we put all this pressure on ourselves to make our parents' sacrifice worth it. We think about how, like, they gave up so much to come here into this, like, you know, a new country and go on this uncharted path, right? But I also think, what better way to honor them than to chart our own path, even if it's not exactly the one they would want.
Right, because they want you to have more choices, and yet they're making all the choices for you, and so a little bit, you know, it's yeah. So well, as far as the mermaids, I'm just really curious, what was your experience with mermaids, and like, what was your kind of fascination as a kid with these mythical creatures, and you know, where did it begin, and how did the lore impact or speak to your own life?
Well, I think that began definitely, let's see, with my cousins. You know, when we first moved to the United States, we lived with my cousins for a bit, my aunt and uncle, and they had a pool, and so we would spend, you know, we would spend hours and hours in the pool pretending to be mermaids, and you know, just that. We also grew up at a time when The Little Mermaid had just come out, so of course this was a fascination that we had. But you know, over the years, I think what ends up to me resonating now that I look back, and you know, this is something that Veronica resonates with too, or relates to as well, is that this idea of, you know, mermaids being, you know, half fish, half human, and yet they're wholly beautiful. They are not actually half and half. They are just these whole beings, you know, and Vero exists in these kind of in-betweens as well. You know, she is bicultural. She is, her body is literally not symmetrical. She is bilingual. And so she's got all these parts of her that can be seen as fragmented to the outside world, but to her, they just make up her completely. They're not, to her, they're not half and half. They're just like, she doesn't see herself as being part one thing or part another. She's just a whole human, and all of those pieces are equally weighted in her. And so I think that's something that that I really appreciated about mermaids, and that she does as well.
Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, I love how you really find these really beautiful metaphors for her, and even with her love story. Let's get into the love story first, then I'll ask that question, because there are other parallels even with his mental health and her, her journey. So I want to talk about Alex and this love story that they have. I love the way they really support the way he supports her, and it's just a really sweet love story. And I was just curious about the way you write your characters. Do you start with one character and then figure out how the other complements that character, or like how did Alex and Vero's story come to be?
Yeah, I love that you bring up Alex because I loved writing him.
I love Alex.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The book first started, the very first thing I wrote about this book started with Vero and Alex. And it was them by the lake, sitting by the lake. And in the very first draft, he actually looks at her scars and makes her feel very uncomfortable with the questions he asked. And I was having a really hard time continuing to write the book. Like, it was just not flowing. And I was like, something is off about this chapter. I don't know what it is. And I was speaking to my friend, Natalia Silva, who's a really close friend of mine. And, we share our work with each other, always in the initial drafts. And she told me to make a promise. She said, if you could make one promise to Veronica, what would it be? And I thought, I want to keep her safe, because she's already living in a world and in an existence that is in so many ways unsafe. As an immigrant, a disabled Latina, like, there are so many ways that the world is actively harming her and making her feel less than. So I didn't want this relationship to be another source of that. And I realized that that's why I wasn't, able to keep writing the book that way. Like, I wanted this book to be about, to really center her joy more than her suffering, even though it doesn't erase her pain and it doesn't erase the things she's gone through. It doesn't erase the different forms of oppression that she's gone through, but it doesn't, I wanted there to be more weight in all the ways that she is also, like, completely deserving of joy and love and safety, and that she has these vibrant dreams, and that she has, like, she's someone who is funny and who who is very, observant of all this beauty around her. And so really, I changed that whole chapter, and I decided.
I'm so glad you did.
Yeah.
She needed that. She did. She really needed that safe space. So I love that.
Yeah. And that's really where Alex came to be. I thought, like, what were because I remember the fears that I had as a young girl, especially once I started, dating and really stepping into my own sexuality. They were very much tied into my relationship with my body and my relationship to my disabilities. And so it was very easy to write Alex, because I thought, like, who was the person I would have loved to have in my life at that time? And the fact that Alex also, he has invisible disabilities, he has depression, and it ends up being this way that they are able to really see and hear each other and understand each other.
Right. Yeah. And that was going to be my next question, as far as, just the you're really, just by talking about it, the mental health and his depression, that, I saw, I was so happy that you brought that into it, because it is such, it is something that slowly that stigma is dissipating, and the more we talk about it, and so I was just really glad that you brought that in. I'm not going to ask you a question about that, because I my time is running out. I have so many questions that I'd love to ask you, but I wanted to know what is the appeal of writing for young people? Why teens?
Oh my gosh. Oh, so much. As you know, my first two books were for adults, and my last two books are for teens. And I fully plan on continuing to write for both. It's really up to what each story asks. But one thing I absolutely love about writing YA, and I know it will change the way I write adult going forward, is that I think it's just about the richness of this time in your life, when you are just in the process of becoming, right? And it's not to say that we don't change as we get older, but there's just something so ripe. When you're a teen and things are happening for the first time, and even small things are just seismic in the ways that they can change you and transform you. So, breathing count back from 10 takes place in one summer, but it's a life-defining summer. It's I find so much hope in that. I find that when I write for YA, it really forces me to remember what it was like to be that age, and how the world just was like, how the world just felt so rich and new in so many ways. And even when, yes, I struggled with things, and even when I went through difficulties, there was also always like a promise on the other side of that.
Mhm.
And I think that we can forget that as we get older. And if anything, I think teens can teach us a lot about ways to continue living once we're older, and to continue to capture that spirit of, no, we are still becoming, and there are still promises on the other side of every day. So I don't think that's unique to teens, but I think teens are just so much more aware of it as it's happening. And I just love writing about that, and I love writing for them because of it.
That's awesome. Okay, and so this question, this is the last question. As an author with ADHD, I sometimes have a hard time of getting the motivation to write, and it can be either or. I can like super hyper focus on it, or I just have a really hard time. What is your process like? Are there like specific times, rituals, places? How do you get your creativity flowing?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. It changes with every book and every story, to be honest.
Really?
I guess
Okay,
one
that
thing
makes
is,
sense.
yeah, right. And I think for me, like, one thing is to maybe not put too much weight on it, always looking the same way, because then I start to, beat myself up if I'm veering off path, which is really just, what if I'm just following my process into a new direction? And I don't necessarily write every day. I've had to grow to really listen to my body and listen to how I'm feeling on a particular day, and then be honest with myself. Like, is it that I don't want to write today because I'm procrastinating and I'm afraid of something? Or is it that I don't want to write today because today's actually a day I need to recharge and be out in the world experiencing life? So that's like a constant conversation with myself. But once I am in like a draft mode, I do try to write consistently. Every day. I do treat it like a job. So Monday through Friday, I'm writing. I don't set necessarily goals in terms of word counts, but I will say on average, I might write like 1,000 words a day. And then if one day just is really not happening, I'll just tell myself, write one line. That's
Yeah, right. Something.
Yeah, anything. And it could be
Yeah.
a terrible line. But what ends up happening usually is that I write more than that.
More than one line.
Yeah, exactly. But if I just tell myself I had to write one line, I'm like tricking my mind into
That's a
doing
trick.
it.
That's a trick that I use as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, it was so wonderful meeting you and just talking about the book. And again, you guys, you come, support Natalia, get this book. It's a wonderful read. Again, it's Breathe and Count Back from 10, and you'll love it. All right. So yes.
Thank you so much, Karen. It was so good. It was so nice talking to you, and I really appreciate all your questions.
You too. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I'm gonna stick around because I want to hear.
I'm gonna stick around too. Okay. I'm just gonna mute myself now.
Gracias, comadres. Our second interview is with author Julissa Arce, a nationally recognized author, sought-after speaker, producer, and social changemaker. She is the best-selling author of My Underground American Dream and Someone Like Me. Arce is a Crooked Media contributor and a frequent writer for Time Magazine, and has provided political commentary across numerous TV networks. She is the co-founder of the Ascend Educational Fund, a college scholarship and mentorship program for immigrant students, regardless of their immigration status. She lives in Los Angeles with her family. Interviewing Julissa is Norma Elia Cantu, an award-winning Chicana author, and the Noreen R. and T. Frank Murchison Professor of the Humanities at Trinity University. She is also a professor emeritus at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and she edits the Rio Bravo Culture and Traditions book series at Texas A&M University Press. Take it away, Comadre Norma.
Gracias, Karen. That was really nice. First of all, I want to thank everyone, Tess and Maria and Nora, and all the Comadres Book Club team for inviting me to interview Julissa, whom I don't know, although she's from San Antonio. I mean, I know all about her. And I loved the interview with right before me. That was amazing, Natalia. I really enjoyed your work, as you know, from when you were living in Austin, but I'm glad, I'm sad you're in Florida, but I'm glad that you were here. And I'm gonna just jump right in because Julissa, your book is so different, being that it is nonfiction. It brings up issues that are there in fiction, but in a different way. You divide your book, and by the way, the book is, there it is, You Sound Like a White Girl. And I love that title. And of course, you explain in the book why that's in there. The subtitle, The Case for Rejecting Assimilation, is also, I think, critical for the whole book. But there are so many instances where it seemed to me that you were rating your own personal testimonial with quite a bit of research and activities around the issues that you were bringing up. You divide the book into two sections, which I thought was really well done. And in the first part, it's the lies about whiteness, about English, all these things. And then the second is about embracing who we are, our history, our culture. And so I think it's a beautiful way of structuring the narrative that you're telling us. So let me just begin. What about the non-immigrant? Because the book seems to be kind of targeting an immigrant narrative. It's about people who come to the United States and are either forced to assimilate or want to assimilate and all of that. But some of us are not immigrants and yet face that same conundrum, especially those of us of particular era when, for example, I was hit for speaking Spanish in school. And so the language issue it looms large in your book. Could you just talk a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much to Las Comadres for having me. I'm so glad that we're finally having this conversation. Yeah, so, it's actually interesting to hear you say that, that it focuses so much on immigrants, because I actually really tried to make the experience, to be clear that this experience that I had as an immigrant is actually one that many Latinos share, even though they are not immigrants. And to say, whether you're an immigrant or not, like whether you're a Latino who's an immigrant or a Latino, a Tejano who has been here for generations, inevitably you've probably have had to answer the proverbial question, where are you from, right? Or where are your parents from? Where you say, I'm from San Antonio, and like,
yeah. Not so much if you grew up in Laredo.
Yeah, but if you go outside of Laredo,
yeah.
But if you go outside of Laredo,
yeah, I understand.
If you leave Laredo and people ask you where you're from, and you say Laredo, they might say, well, where are your parents from? And people might not even know where Laredo is, outside of Texas.
Yeah, that's the point where we can educate people.
Right.
Yeah, but you're right.
So I think that
Go ahead.
So I actually think that that's sort of that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that whether you were born here or whether you are an immigrant like I am, there are still experiences that we share because of our background and because people make assumptions about Latinos, and they always assume that we are from someplace else, even if we're not, right? And so I really sort of try to make that point. I sort of show several times in the book sort of the history of like the Mexican-American War, of when sort of the first Mexicans supposedly had access to citizenship, and how like the Mexican-American War really changed everything for not just for us, but for this country, and how little we sort of know about it or understand sort of the implications of it and how far-reaching those implications have been. when you talk sort of about the language, you know, one thing that I really try to emphasize is the loss of the Spanish language and like where that loss comes from, whether it was because of laws that segregated schools by Mexican schools and white schools, you know, whether it was that many, I think that there are still many Latinos who think that by being in proximity to whiteness, that's what's going to get us to belong in this country, that's what's going to give us success, that's what's going to give us acceptance and respect. And so, you know, I know that, like, as you mentioned, like you were hit for speaking Spanish, right? So there was like many people who didn't teach their children how to speak Spanish because they thought, well, I don't want my kids to get hit, right? I don't want my kids to face the same kind of backlash that I have faced for speaking Spanish.
Right. That's
you know.
exactly what I tell my students. It isn't your fault that you don't know Spanish. Your parents were protecting you. And we need to remind ourselves of that history. And I'm glad you brought up the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, because the treaty did guarantee certain things that, of course, didn't happen. It's not happening. Let me shift a little bit and ask you, I think it was chapter 4, you're talking about the Crystal City Chicano movement and what was happening there with the cheerleading. And I love the way you end that chapter. Could you talk a little more about that particular aspect?
Yeah. So I talk about the Crystal City in the second half of the book, where I'm talking about sort of reclaiming our history, because I think that, you know, many of us have had this experience of you go to school, you're learning about the history of the United States, and I asked myself, where were we? You know, because in any sort of story that I was learning about the United States, there was no mention of Mexicans. There was no mention. There was no mention of us. And so I used to wonder, like, you know, what schools did we go to when schools were segregated? You know, what fountain did we drink from during times of segregation and Jim Crow? Did we fight in the world wars? Because again, like, there was just never any mention of this. And so one of the stories that I researched that was really impactful for me was the story of the young women of Crystal City, Texas, who in 1968 were not able to be cheerleaders because their school had a rule that said that only one of the 4 cheerleaders could be Mexican American, even though the school was 85% Mexican American. But, you know, if you're from Texas, you kind of know that who plays football and who cheers matters, right? It's sort of like a sign of who's in charge. And so it really mattered in this small town that Chicanas were not able to be cheerleaders. And these young women, Diana Palacios, Diana Serna, Sabrita Lara, and others organized. And for 17 days, they led these walkouts. Teachers from surrounding towns came and taught them so that they wouldn't fall behind. Their parents, many of whom worked for the white families in the town, supported them. Many of them got fired as retaliation for supporting these walkouts. And yet, you know, they continued in their fight. And after 17 days, they were able to overturn that rule. They were able to get Mexican food to be served in the cafeteria. They were able to get bilingual education. And I think what was even more powerful than the changes in their school was also the fact that within 2 years, the city council and the school board became majority Latino. And so I was really, really inspired by this story because I just thought, wow, you know, when I was young, I wanted to be a cheerleader because I wanted to be sort of this all-American cheerleader, right? And like many times when I ask people, like, picture, like, what do you see when I say all-American cheerleader? You know, it's not often people who look like me. It's usually a blonde girl with blue eyes or green eyes, you know, who's skinny and able-bodied. And it's not, you know, these Chicanas cheerleaders who were fighting in Crystal City, Texas for the right to bear pom-poms. And so, you know, I really wish that I had known that story, because I think it would have helped me to understand that I could be sort of like this brown girl who could be a cheerleader. And I didn't have to change things about myself or feel less than because I didn't look like that. And to know that people fought for my right to do that, right? Because I think many times we take it for granted, like we take for granted the rights that we have today because we never learn about the people who fought so that we could have the rights that we have today, even if it's not all the rights that we want yet. So yeah, that story was really, really impactful. And I'm really grateful that I've had an opportunity to meet these women and to talk to them and to spend time with them and to learn from them. It's really been really amazing building a friendship with them.
It really is an incredible story and a landmark story. I mean, the Raza Unida party is the one that comes in and then takes over and becomes a statewide political force. So it isn't just local anymore after that.
Yeah.
And going a little bit back to the first part of the book now, because I think it's related, the lie of success. You worked with Wall Street, Goldman. And what are some of those lessons? And I hope everyone here will buy your book and read it and enjoy the analysis, because undergirding your narrative is an analysis, a critical analysis of the situation and how you see it. So could you talk a little bit about that? I think it's chapter 3, The Lie of Success, that I thought I have to ask a question about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, so when I first moved to the United States, I think my family was sort of a quote unquote like typical immigrant family who came to the United States in search of a better life, the American dream. And what that meant to my family was like financial stability, right? And what Natalia was talking about sort of having this pressure to honor our parents' sacrifices, right? And to make it be worth something. For me, that meant making a lot of money. I just thought if I could make a lot of money, I can that's how I'll earn respect. That's how I'll be accepted. That's how I honor my parents' sacrifices. That's how I make all this really awful things we've been through as a family to be here worth it. And and I had a very prestigious job. I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars working on Wall Street, and yet I still had these experiences where I could go to a restaurant with my colleagues, go use the ladies' rooms, and on the way back have a table of mostly white people ask me to bring them water because they think that I'm the server, or a client who was asking me to bring him coffee because he thinks I'm the assistant, and people still making assumptions about me. It doesn't, because people don't know the size of my bank account. People don't know my job. People don't know what I do. They just see me and make certain assumptions about me. And I think the biggest sort of thing about it too is just how much of myself I had to give up in order to fit into that kind of culture, right? Having to leave my hoop earrings at home, having to leave so many parts of myself in order to walk into this very sort of like the height of whiteness and capitalism, and having to leave so much of myself behind in order to fit in there. And later on in the book, I talk about Mi Familia, that movie, Mi Familia, which is like a 90s movie with Jennifer Lopez, and it follows a Mexican-American family through several generations in East Los Angeles. And like the last generation, the youngest son is named Guillermo, and then he goes by Memo. And then by the end of the movie, his name is Bill. And Bill is the youngest one in the family, and he's the one that made it. He's the one that got out of El Barrio, and he's the one that became a lawyer and married a really beautiful blonde woman who, when he brings her and her family to his house to meet his family, the woman says to her family, Bill is not like them. Bill is different. And I think that part, when I watched that movie, I just felt so sad for Bill. I felt so sad that he had to change his name, that he had to like leave his neighborhood behind, that he felt like he made it because he married this white woman and because he had this prestigious job. And it also gave people the opportunity to say, well, he's different, right? He's good. He's one of the good ones. And so always having to prove yourself as though you're one of the good ones, having to, like, you always feel that way,
Yeah. I love it that at the end, you write the ending that you would like for Bill. And I read that she says, this is the ending I would write for my Bill, the Memo story movie. He would open his own practice in El Barrio, teach his kids Spanish, move back to the East Side. He had realized there is a different way to achieve success, one that is more rewarding. He'd reject whiteness and reclaim his roots. Our lives are already a victory. I just love that kind of.
Thank you. Yeah.
The other,
And in some ways, that's kind of the story I have written for myself, like leaving Wall Street and writing these books and really connecting to my history, to my heritage, really reclaiming it and feeling really proud of it. And it's such a different, I feel like a different person having this shift in perspective about how to achieve success.
and I probably can just read more about the book, but could you tell us what was it that spurred that shift? What aha moment happened to make you make that shift?
Yeah, I wish I had like a moment, like I wish I had a really good story about like, this is the moment that, it all made sense. But I think it was more about just like a series of things, just like a series of things.
Incremental, yes.
Yeah, but it's funny when Natalia was talking about her family sort of like, or like the book, like not really believing in this green card, and for me it was like the opposite. Like once I had my green card, I was like, this is it, I am free. Like I can quit this job. I can do whatever I want. I can finally ask myself, what is it that I want to do with my life? Because if all else fails, like I have this green card that gives me so much, it gives me the ability to find another job. It gives me the ability to move from one job to another. It gives me the ability to like go back and see my family and be able to come back home to the United States. And I think having this green card really did allow me to take those risks of leaving Wall Street and of, pursuing this career as a writer. But even then it was like, okay, I have this green card, but even having papers didn't help me to belong, right? Even having citizenship didn't help me to belong. And then you think about sort of like even in the last few years, there's been cases of people losing their citizenship, like people taking away their citizenship, even for people who like were born in the US, but now the government is making a case that they were actually born in Mexico and that their midwives like falsified documents. So it's still sort of like, I think just kind of recognizing all of these things, like, okay, English didn't help me belong. Trying to like sound like a white girl didn't help me belong. Getting all this money, getting this prestigious job didn't help me belong. So where can I find belonging? Where can I feel proud of myself and proud of my roots? And so it was sort of, I think, just like this journey of trying to find that place for myself. And I always say that I think that the thing that was transformative for me was learning the history, like really learning the history of our people, because that's really what helped me to recognize that even though I was not born here, I have roots here, and those roots ground me to this country and give me a claim to this land. And just kind of like understanding that we've always been here. We have been here all along. We were here before it was called the United States. We have taken part in every single important moment of American history. And in some ways, we have shaped American history, even if the rest of the country doesn't know it yet, but we have to know it first.
Yes. And I was really glad that you brought up the wars and how many of our raza have died. My brother was killed in Vietnam. And so when I saw those figures, and it rarely comes up that it's in the past, you go forward, forget it. But thank you for bringing up that and to reminding readers that this isn't new. We've been here for a long time. I mean, the Reconquista continues, right? From the Aztecs who in 1325 get to found Tenochtitlan because they're coming from up north, like Utah. That's where Aztlan is supposedly situated. So yeah, definitely. And I'm going to switch a little bit because I'm curious about a couple of things. The not being Latina enough, not being white enough, Is it ever possible for someone, and now I'm talking, I've been reading a dissertation on Afrofuturism, so I'm kind of thinking about the future. Is there going to be a time when all this will be moot? We won't have that.
I hope so. I hope that there is a time where we can all be ourselves and not constantly feel like we have to fit in a box. Because as my friend Rivas likes to say, like, you cannot contain all of this in a box. You cannot put people who come from like 26, 30 different countries into one box, right? Like, we all have different experiences. We come from different places. We have different skin tones, which makes our experiences completely different. The experience of a Black Latino is very different than the experience of a white Latino, even though they both are Latino. And neither one of them is less Latino, and yet their experiences are so vastly different. And so I do hope that there is one day where we can just be, where we don't have to explain so much about ourselves for things to make sense to other people. I mean, I kind of just wish that we get to a place where we just don't care about what other people have to say, or like, if they don't understand it, they don't understand it. But I think it's going to take a lot of, self-work, like, I think each of us individually have to do the work of, like I said, learning our history and sort of reclaiming our identity, and in some ways forming an identity that works for us.
I love it that you're imagining that. Gloria Anzaldúa says nothing happens in the real world until we first imagine it. So we have to imagine that world. Yes, definitely. Now, I didn't know this, but in talking with the Comadres, I found out that you are now entering into Hollywood. So you're producing a couple of TV shows, working on a film. Do you have anything on screen yet? Is there anything we can watch? And if not, when are things coming? I'm excited about this.
Thank you. Yeah. So my first project is it's my first book, My Underground American Dream, that I've been developing into a television series. And the story of Crystal City, I'm one of the executive producers to bring that story to TV. And so, we've been working on that for a couple of years now. It just takes a really long time. And Hollywood, I think, is in some ways working to like get things made. And Hollywood has in some ways been the most difficult thing I've ever done and the most frustrating thing I've ever done. And, to your question about like, is any of this stuff on TV? It's like no, which is why it's so frustrating because, we've been working on it for years, and it's not for lack of talent. It's not for lack of amazing writing. It really is just the industry is really difficult to crack, but but we keep trying. I sort of feel like, okay, I've cracked other really difficult things before, and so I just kind of have to keep at it, even in moments when frankly it gets very discouraging. But I think conversations like this kind of really help to like re-energize me, and like really to keep me focused on like why I'm banging my head against the wall constantly when trying to do this. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's been a really great and exciting transition. I won't stop writing. I mean, like, writing is my thing, but sort of just like expanding the ways in which I can tell stories. And some stories are great to be told in books and then be told on TV, and some stories like, I want to be able to tell our stories as far and wide as possible.
And Julissa, the time is almost over and I have so many other questions, but I'm very, very happy to hear that you are going to keep writing. I also wondered what other books or what other writing project you're involved with, and if it's going to, are you ever going to go into fiction? Are you going to stay with nonfiction?
You know, I actually do really want to write a novel. I feel like I want the ability to make things up. I want the ability to, like, you know, I mean, I think that whether or not I write fiction, like a lot of those stories will be in some ways inspired by things, you know, but I want that freedom to imagine and to create a world and to create characters and to have different endings um and to just kind of like let my imagination loose, you know. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I hope to keep working on in the next sort of like for my next book. But we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
Well, we are anxiously
and how long it
waiting.
takes.
It takes time, like you said, and now
Yeah.
there's this whole movement about slow scholarship and slow to just kind of relish the process, and it's
Right.
not always about getting there, it's about the journey, and we have
Yeah.
to remember that. So I don't know if you want to share anything else. I just love the fact that you and Natalia are on together. I think it's
Yeah.
a wonderful synchronicity of things happening. The two books just fit beautifully, and the two of you fit beautifully. So muchas gracias. But is there anything else
Thank
you would
you.
like to share with us?
No, I think I would just echo your comments about Natalia. I love her book and I love her work, and we've gotten to spend a little bit of time together, and I hope we get to spend more time together. But it's funny, it's interesting how, you know, at first glance you're like, these two books and these two authors are like, what's the common thread, and then, you know, we're having these conversations and it's like, oh, there's so many kind of common threads, and that's and yeah, and parallels, and that's kind of like the beautiful thing I think about writing, is that you can have two totally different stories that still touch on the same themes and the same concepts. And I think writing is really magic.
And you will both be at the Texas Book Festival.
Yeah, we will be.
So
Yeah,
there will
we'll
be a
definitely
chance.
have
Oh,
to
that'd
see
be
each other.
fun.
November
Another
4th
dinner.
and 5th.
Yes, November 4th and 5th. Unfortunately, I can't be there. We have Indian Saldua conference in San Antonio those same days. But I'm so happy that you'll be there.
I think it's
Thank
5th
you
and
so
6th.
much.
Sorry, I've got the dates wrong.
Well,
That's
thank you
right.
so
It's
much, and
Saturday
thank you
Sunday.
thank you for those really wonderful questions, and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nora?
Well, comadres, you all took the words out of my mouth. So I'm going to go ahead and just say thanks to Comadre authors Natalia Sylvester and Julissa Arce, and their publishers, Harper Collins, Clarion Books, and Flatiron Books, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. And of course, to our interviewers, Comadres Karen and Norma, who really were so insightful and so asked the right questions to get these stories to kind of meld. And in our minds, to look at the youthful hope, and then the adult hope, and then the way we take our lives forward with what we're learning here from each other. We want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us, and to those that submitted questions, we'd like to thank all our volunteers, without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as with other readers, and we need more Latinos writing these reviews. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library doesn't have a book you want to read, well, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our November books are The Neapolitan Sisters, a novel of heritage and hope by Margot Candela, and More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Please join us in celebrating our quinceañero throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night, and always read Latino literature.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I'm not ready to leave.